If I could have everyone be upstanding, if I could have Dave lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Born and unborn.
Now, Sister Mary Anthony would probably be a little upset with me. I was given classes, public speaking, when I was at St. Matthias. I was told that you really should memorize your speech. Now, let me ask your indulgence, because 4 weeks ago I was going to tell you about the new initiative that the Worcester Tea Party is embarking upon to combat the millionaire's tax. That speech I mostly memorized. In between the time period since then, we've had some rather daunting events that have occurred in our nation. And I felt that as president of the Worcester Tea Party, I should address, and of course, we should have on film so that there's a record of my addressing these events. So without further introduction, and I'll trip over the table, I'm going to start off by reminding you all that it was April 7th in 1775 when Dr. Samuel Johnson said, patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel. I don't agree with that.
No.
I believe, and I'm going to put forth to you the proposition, that racism is the last refuge of a scoundrel. We're going to have to unpack this a bit, but I think everybody is going to be able to argue this point in future. That's what this is all about. It's an educational moment. Merriam-Webster's defines racism as a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, that racial differences produce inherent superiorities and inferiorities. That's bunk. I get to use the important words. I don't use those descriptive ones. W.E.B. Du Bois knew that that was wrong over 100 years ago. He was a social scientist and a black man. He advanced the cause of liberty in his way, in his day, and he knew that that was bunk. He said that the idea that there were separate and discrete white and black races is not true. That we have plenty of evidence to show that these things are a social construct. It is a social construct. It is not an actual biological construct. If you study the Bible, you will notice, if you read the whole Bible, there are only two races in the Bible. People and angels.
I'm sorry. We're good? Okay.
Now, therefore, if you are a person of faith, it is incumbent upon you to realize that we are all sons and daughters of Adam and Eve, and that any differences that we place are immaterial in the eyes of our Creator. And science, also today, has established that there is little, if any, validity to the idea of race. Let's see, how did they phrase that? Michael Udall, professor of public health. If that's Donald Trump, tell him I'm busy.
Shut your phones off, please.
I gotta turn this off. I thought I turned it off.
Professor of public health at Drexel University in Philadelphia. It is a concept, race is, that we scientists think is too crude to provide useful information. It is a concept that has social meaning that infers a scientific understanding, but a real understanding of human genetic diversity is far in excess of what this predicts. If race was used in medicine, it would also be something that would be leading to, how did they phrase that? It was so much better when I write than when I try to recite. That would cause way too much inaccuracies to be able to be followed in the medical field. Now, that would seem enough for us in the 20th century to be able to say that the concept of race and the use of race in any sort of policy has to be cast by the wayside. Just like titles of nobility or orders of knighthood or any of these things that are best left in the old past. But it's not. Race is effective and useful in one area and one area only. And it is ugly and disgusting, and it's used in politics.
Right. Which is also ugly.
If we look back in time to Samuel Johnson, he was an Englishman. And he had his biographer, James Boswell, was a Scotsman. They both would have believed that they were of separate white races. This is a political construct based on the nation states and tribes that they felt they were from. People invest a lot of their self-worth in these stories that they create about themselves and about their history and about where they come from. Dictators, tyrants, and corrupt politicians use these stories to attain and maintain control and power, and to steal from us. They can use these stories to justify the unjustifiable. When people are at their lowest, when people are vulnerable and afraid, they need a boogeyman. The best boogeyman is always someone that looks different than us, but is close to us. This is a story that reaches back as far as the Bronze Age in Bible stories. And this is a story that is as modern as today's headlines. And what we saw happen in Charlotte and Boston. The idea of racism is something that has been part of the human condition for a very long time, even though the word racism is a 20th century construct. Racism has played an ugly role in American politics since before the founding of our nation. For much of our history, we have been in conflict with the Pequot, or the Cherokee, or the Sioux. We have had fights with our Mexican neighbors. We had chattel slavery of Africans, and after the Confederacy was defeated and brought back into our republic, the South enacted Jim Crow laws and formed the Ku Klux Klan to terrorize and oppress. During the Second World War, we interred over 100,000 Japanese Americans. These are facts that cannot be denied, and they are injustices that must be corrected. Racist beliefs led to racist laws, which led to injustice. All forms of injustice must be remedied if we are to seek the true advancement of our republic. you know, if I had planned this right, I would have her come in at the right times for her effect. Don't fog up your glasses when you're talking. Today, the KKK and neo-Nazi groups are in the headlines. They seek to inflate themselves and celebrate this false idea of whiteness. They do that to deny the humanity of others. They would embrace big government to solve the imagined problems that they see. Dylan Ruth was one such terrible individual. The new Black Panther Party, as well as other hate groups, demonstrate that there is nothing unique in white racism that can't be imitated by others. In America, there are some who believe in an expansive and professional government. They believe in this in part to end racism. They call themselves progressives. They believe that they alone are smart enough and moral enough to rule over those poor backwards folks because we're too racist to rule ourselves. They seek to assuage feelings of guilt by punishing people for sins of their ancestors. These self-styled progressives are racists. They're as blinded by racism as the men who owned plantations in the old times. Should have made better points. With this understanding of racism as a social construct, it becomes obvious that scoundrels will use this intellectually bankrupt and emotionally intoxicating rhetoric to sway voters. It is clear why dishonest political activists would lie and call the Tea Party racist. Their attacks against us are actually evidence of their own racism, or of their cynical attempts to manipulate voters. Anybody who understands what the Worcester Tea Party is about knows that these scoundrels are our enemies. We rigorously pursue the truth and not emotionally comfortable bromides. The Worcester Tea Party works for smaller government. We emphatically stand for individual liberty, which is an emphatic defense of the ultimate minority right, the individual. We are all human beings, endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our unwavering devotion to these core principles is why the Worcester Tea Party is not like many other political groups. Those ideals are transcendent and immaculate. I wish our nation had always been able to live up to those ideals. I wish I could say that I had always lived up to those ideals. Today we know that we are still far from perfect. But we know that we as the Worcester Tea Party have a role to play in creating that more perfect union and to establish justice by advocating for all. Thank you. God bless America. God bless you.